People who have hired other people. What are some unexpected ways a candidate has disqualified themselves from decrease their odds of getting a position they applied for? English is my second language. Moved to the US after college and got an interview for an engineering position at a top aerospace company. I was nailing it, as far as I know, until the hiring manager asks, "How is your relationship with your current manager? Would it upset him if you leave, or would he say good riddance?" I thought good riddance meant something positive like good luck or best of wishes, so I said she'd say the latter. I didn't get the job. A great example of why no one should be afraid to ask questions in an interview. I recruit for the blue collar industry, and there was a poor guy where English was second language who kinda struggled to understand me, but we had Samoan and Tongan speaking staff who were assisting the recruit process. We were through the interview process, and while pre-employment drug screening via urine sample I was explaining, in depth I might add, pee in the pot up to here, close the lid, bring to me for test, the requirements of the test. When he was taking quite some time to pee in the pot, which can happen if people are a little nervous or shy, I called out to see if he was okay, which he said yeah boss. About 10 minutes later he appears and the pot is securely wrapped in hand towels so as not to be on display. I found this odd as the amount of urine samples we do meant we were so used to handling pee it was second nature. He looked a little sheepish and coy, very telling of someone who perhaps was a little nervous they might fail. I took the cup from him, with sanitary gloves on of course, and proceeded to unwrap the pot in order to undertake the test. I gagged when I realized he had shoveled his crap into the pot assuming he needed to provide a fecal sample. What possessed him to think we wanted to analyze his crap is beyond me. Fair to say we couldn't employ him on that day on that basis. I sent him away after some explanation, and he was quite embarrassed, having saved him all the embarrassment I could. He came back the next week to correctly complete the test, after I'd set him up WTH a colleague, and proceeded into a job the very next day. 2 years later he is one of our most reliable and hard-working staff. I once saw a resume that stated they were a valid Victorian. Either they were trying to say they were top of their class or that they were a genuine person from 19th century England, neither of which were true. Our bony Pultia. In my job I've interviewed hundreds of individuals. One that stands out was for an entry-level retail position. I called him in for an interview and after introductions brought him up to the break room for the interview itself as the training room was in use. He was a kinda sketchy looking individual, wearing a beat up black cap and what looked to be a dirty hoodie, but I didn't think too much of it because I did call him in on short notice. I don't like to judge a candidate solely on how they look, and see, it's retail. What do you expect candidates to look like? I excused myself for 30 seconds to check in on my trainee, and when I came back the candidate looked a little uncomfortable. Not thinking much of it, we start the interview asking the standard questions about what he's done previously, why he wants to work here, etc. I notice he continues to look uncomfortable and it almost looks as though he's hiding something in his hands. I eventually ask if there's something wrong I can assist with and he comes clean. He explains he has a fistful of candy, jelly beans in this case, and he's not sure what to do with them. I'm a bit gobsmacked and have questions which I wish I would have asked. Where did he get this candy? Why did he think it was a good idea to eat candy in an interview? What was he going to do with this candy? As I tried to articulate a response he exclaims I know and proceeds to shove the entire handful into his mouth. And this isn't a couple jelly beans. This is a massive handful of now sweaty, sticky candies that he has just thrown into his mouth. And he starts chewing and chewing. His hands are stained and he's really working his jaw due to the sheer amount and chewy nature of them. I swear 30 seconds pass before he finally gulps them down and asks calmly, "You were saying?" Needless to say the interview did not continue much longer than that, and unfortunately the candy man did not get a job with us. Not my story but an old professor of mine, but it's too perfect not to use. A long time ago his department was looking to hire some kind of new junior assistant professor type. They had narrowed it down to 2 highly qualified guys, both fresh out of grad school. They knew they were going to hire one or the other. As a final step of the process they decided to take both of them out to dinner separately. The first guy is cordial throughout the whole thing, seems to get along with everybody, seems just fine. Then at the end of the meal he picks up his empty plate and licks the whole thing clean, like, tongue flat against surface of the plate, covering every inch of it until it's clean. in the middle of a nice restaurant. Then he just sets the plate down like it was the most normal thing in the world. Everyone just stares at him and then awkwardly try to just wrap things up. Afterward they laugh about it to each other like WTF. What a bizarre and unnecessary way to throw away a near clinch on a good job opportunity. So then they take the second guy out. Almost just a formality at this point. Again, everything is fine. He's polite, seems perfectly qualified, seems to know the right things to say. Then at the very end they ask him if he had any questions for them. He pauses and thinks for a moment, then goes, "So what is the student-teacher dating policy?" Afterward the other professors are sitting around together and one of them goes, "Well, looks like we're hiring the plate licker." First one to make me laugh out loud. Worked in onboarding for a while. Basically just putting people that other folks hired through the hiring process. One guy wouldn't answer any of my calls, emails, or text messages. Then, in reply to emails from the hiring manager, said I hadn't attempted to contact him at all. Hiring manager sat 2 desks over from me and had listened to me leaving voicemails for 3 days. Guy promptly lost all chances at the job and he accused me of not doing my job. My wife once interviewed a man who refused to speak to women due to religious reasons. This meant he would not speak to her during his interview. She tried to stress to him that she was the manager for the position in question and would be the person conducting the interview. She asked him questions for 10 minutes, none of which he answered. She said it was incredibly uncomfortable. The strange thing was as he was not a new hire and had like 12 years experience at another company. Not sure how you can make it 12 years when refusing to work with or talk to women. I was teacher and one time I had a parent-teacher conference in which I mentioned that their son seemed to have a hard time following directions. The dad said, basically, that's what he taught his son, that he never has to listen to a woman. They also believed that their daughter's education wasn't important because she was pretty. Opening line of the covering letter of their application. Today is the day when my worst fears were realized. From there, it was a litany of everything that had ever gone wrong in their life. Sadly, it also seemed like they were the result of consistently bad decisions. I'd have thought that they were deliberately trying to throw the application, except that it just had so much excruciating detail. It was a lot of effort. Candidate arrived in rollerblades. Stayed in rollerblades the whole interview. He used the word blade instead of walk or go for the whole interview. Can't tell if I was being punked. Some more details. He was in his early 20s. Resume was good but not great. The whole rollerblades thing wasn't a deal breaker, but it definitely didn't help. He insisted on sitting on the desk rather than on a seat, so his rollerblade feet could just hang. I had to insist a couple more times throughout the interview for him to reluctantly take a seat, which didn't help either. Job location: London. Candidate location: Denver. Candidate willing to relocate: no. I'm currently getting sent resumes from foreign nationals, some who aren't authorized to work in the US. We are a small firm that does 95+% of our work with US gov entities requiring a security clearance. The applicant listed several non-profit community organizations he had served as a volunteer, only to discover that those entities didn't exist. Apparently he thought that being associated with charitable groups would strengthen his resume and that they'd never be contacted for verification. You must be mistaken. My friend insisted that the Human Fund was a reputable charity when he donated to them in my name. When I managed a retail store, it wasn't uncommon for people to bail on job interviews with last minute or no notice, but there was only ever one person who no-showed the interview and then called the next week asking if they got the job. Yes, you did. You started yesterday, but you didn't show up so you were fired. Do you guys drug test? Yes, we do. For like, all the drugs? Yes. Okay, thank you for your time. And then he got up and left. At least he was honest. So, it can be a good idea to call and check on your application, but don't call the store. Ask for the owner and see if he's looked at your application 1 hour after you left IT with US. This person actually called 3 times throughout the day, and each time we told her the owner will review your application tonight after we close, as this is the busiest time of year for us. Spring at a greenhouse. I'd put money on this being her parents' doing. There have been times when I've had to lie and tell my dad that yes, I had called a company multiple times that day because he thought a higher calls per hour rate led to a better chance of getting hired. Please don't name your resume job crap. We had a guy come in for an interview, and he showed up a full 40 minutes prior to his scheduled interview. One room office shared by 3 people, so there's no good place for him to wait. I said you can go to the coffee shop next door and come back at the scheduled time. He said, no, I'll just wait here. I have a phone call to make. He proceeds to have a very loud phone conversation in our one room office. When it was finally time for his scheduled interview, he was still on the phone and actually shushed me and said I'm on the phone. 10 minutes later he was ready to be interviewed. Not even sure why we proceeded with the interview, but it was over quickly and his resume was in the recycle before the door even closed. I feel like I generally understand people, but then things like this happen and I'm just lost. Posted this before, but it's always good for a revisit. Applicant: so, you'll do background checks, criminal history for this job, right? Me: yeah. Applicant: so, the court messed up, and when you run my background, it's not gonna say statutory, but it was totally just statutory. Oh Jesus. I work at a hospital on a med-surg floor. We have a 2-part interview, one with the unit manager and one with either a nurse or an aide. We have a series of questions to ask based on a survey they fill out on the end of the application. She managed to make her way to me and this was her response to a question. If you saw a co-worker doing something unethical, like stealing from a patient, what would you do? It depends if it was valuable or not. I mean, who hasn't stolen something before? I had to take a personality test for a retail job once. The test was all questions like agree or disagree, it's okay to take money out of the till sometimes, or everyone steals from the register from time to time. At first, I was all, heck no, that's stealing, but by the end of the questionnaire I thought maybe it was much more widely accepted than I thought. I was hiring in pharmaceutical sales, and it was a large drug launch for a to be newly approved product, so they were hiring like 200 people nationwide. Because of this, first step was a phone screen with us, then a video interview with the hiring manager, before flying candidates out for the final panel interviews where they would meet with 5 individuals, VPs of HR and sales of each region, and sales directors for those territories. Because of this, we were very strict with the interviews and who moved forward, which means it really sucked when a guy went into his final panel interview and started doing magic tricks. Very seriously, he started pulling flowers from his sleeves, and he tried to vanish an interviewer's coffee, but ended up spilling it everywhere instead. In that same round of hiring, we also had an individual who did his video call from his coffee table. He sat on the floor, and he had someone ring his doorbell. From the conversation with the hiring manager, he asked politely if he could go answer the door in case it was an emergency. She said sure, no big deal, and the guy stood up flashing his tighty whities. She didn't say much about it when he came back, but needless to say she couldn't stop laughing when she told us about it. TLDR. Don't do magic tricks in your interview, unless you're interviewing to be a magician. If you do a video interview, please wear all of your clothes, pants included. Fancy shirt with no pants. In recruitment we call that the clothing mullet. Doing a tech screen phone interview, and you could tell the guy was googling his heart out every time we asked a question. He would say, let me think about that for a second. The background ambient noise would cut off, and then cut back on a second later, and he'd start reading off stuff from the top Google result. I once called a guy for his scheduled phone interview and he answered the phone as if he thought I was a telemarketer. He was incredibly rude and asked who I was at least 3 times before understanding I was calling to interview him. After realizing his mistake, he wasn't even apologetic for yelling at me. It was a tense interview and he did not move forward. My boyfriend just told me the story of a new bartender they hired who got fired after one day. Why? She couldn't open a can of beer. Had a guy who reluctantly told me he used to work at a adult shop. To try and save him from feeling weird, I told him that my wife has always found it fascinating and would love to work in one. His response, well, isn't she a freaking weirdo? If I was the interviewer, I'd have to leave the room. I'd be laughing so hard. I hope there was no pause and he just said it without having to think. That would make it 20 times funnier. I once interviewed a candidate for an accounting position at the non-profit I was working for. It was early in my career and I hadn't conducted many interviews. I'm certain I was more nervous than the candidates. One applicant came in and, after introductions and shaking hands, I offered him a seat and took my own to begin the interview. When I looked up, he was standing at attention. When I asked him to take his seat, he refused and referenced his military service. I tried to press forward and engage in a conversation, but the awkwardness of speaking to a tall person who was standing just a few feet away from me only grew. In the end, I thanked him for his service and eliminated him from my list. Yeah, I've interviewed former service members. They sit down when you tell them to take a seat. Sounds like the guy was either faking his military service record, disgustingly super common, or he was just kind of a douchebag. One guy cited his driver's license as a professional certification. I'm a lobby guard, so I don't do the interviews. However, I have had interviewers ask me how the interviewee behaved in the lobby while waiting. Most just sit there twiddling their thumbs nervously, but 9/10 times those who ask me questions about the company and or the team they are interviewing for are hired, and 10/10 times people who are genuinely rude to me are never hired. I used to be a manager where we did a lot of hiring. I've probably now hired hundreds of people and looked at thousands and thousands of resumes. A lady with an MBA applied. At first glance, she seemed interesting. Then when I googled her school, it was clearly a degree mill with a somewhat similar name to a real university. Dude told me the only reason he was applying was because he was ordered by a judge to get a job because he was years behind on his child support. When asked what the story was on his lengthy employment gap, he said he had quit working to avoid paying child support. To top it off, he clearly wasn't qualified for the position and had lied his way into the interview in what I'm guessing was some kind of malicious compliance with the judge's orders. A dude asked my co-worker on a date. During his interview, he didn't get the job or the date. The entire job was doing phone support. She said she didn't like talking on the phone. Dude stopped answering my question to tell me that wearing glasses was making my eyes dependent on glasses and I should stop wearing them. His first question, before we even started, was about our impropriety policy. So were his second, third, and fourth questions, including detailed scenarios. I'm not sure if he was acting as a fetish, but either way, it wasn't great. Our male receptionist welcomed him and escorted him to the interview room, where I was sitting. He asked if we were waiting for the receptionist to return, and asked if I would make him a coffee while we waited. I explained I was the hiring manager, and he laughed at how funny it would be to have a female boss because it was so unexpected. When we started on the tech questions, she said she didn't know how to use a computer and wasn't going to learn because they were too complicated. She wasn't that old, maybe mid-40s, and it was only about 10 years ago. I have no idea how she made it in the world. About the female boss one, a female friend of mine was interviewing someone together with a male colleague, and the guy only made eye contact with the male colleague, even if he was answering her questions. People's nature comes out when they are stressed. I work in software development. As part of the interview process at my company, our candidates interview over Skype using a code-sharing website for them to complete a small and relatively simple problem to help weed out candidates who are dishonest on their resumes. In one of my interviews, I started with the usual introduction of myself, my role within the company, so on and so forth. I introduce her to the task and explain that it'll be on a code sharing website and that she'll need to follow the link I will send her to access it. I paste the link into the text window and explain to her how to access it. Some people haven't used Skype before and don't know how to access text chat in a video call. She smiles and nods and asks me when I'm done, "Will you be writing the link on the whiteboard?" What whiteboard? I look behind me and remember that yes, there is a small whiteboard behind me, and this woman was expecting me to handwrite the, not so short, link and she would read it off the webcam to type it into her browser. No, I explain, I sent you the link within Skype itself. If you'll just click. I'm forced to trail off as she reaches forward and picks up her webcam, which I'm assuming was mounted to the top of her monitor. I get a nice close-up of her eye as she peers inside the camera, then turns it on its side to observe it some more. I ask her what she's doing. Trying to find the link, she replies. Dumbfounded. I once again explained that the link was sent over Skype and wouldn't appear behind me nor on the webcam. She resumes the smile and nod routine as I ask her to follow my directions to access the Skype text chat window. I ask her to wave her mouse cursor over my face until she sees some buttons appear. She takes her hand off the mouse, raises it, and waves it over the screen. I explain to her again that she needs to use the mouse and she smiles and nods again. After about 15 minutes of a 30-minute interview, she did finally discover the link in the Skype text chat, but she proceeded to type it into her browser by hand. She did not make it to the next round. I got frustrated just by reading this. On the inverse of this, I went into a job interview where the manager said, "Look, I don't really care. You are my 30th applicant in a week and everyone has failed the drug test. If you can pass the drug test, you are hired. I don't even care about anything else anymore." I passed. It was an awesome job and he was a great manager. You have been visited by the romantic doggo. Comment love is magic so you never fall in the friend zone. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.